Mr. Struck.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Gilkison. Could you state your full name for the court reporter, please?
William R. Gilkison, Jr., Gilkeson.
And Mr. Gilkison, you are here today pursuant to a subpoena issued by the legislative defendants in this case, correct?
Yes, sir. That is the only reason I'm here today.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate you taking the time to come here this morning. I want the court to understand a little bit about your background, if that's okay. Could you tell the court about your work as a legislative staffer in the past?
I was hired out of law school in 1985 on the a central division of the General Assembly staff at the time called the Legislative Research Division. I think it's now called the Legislative Analysis Division.
And what did you do for that division?
I was a staff attorney. I was staff counsel to committees. I was assigned to committees doing legislative staff work, which involved going to committees, going to committee meetings, summarizing bills, drafting amendments, and advising legislators, answering questions, doing legal research.
Okay. And part of your work as a legislative staffer involved dealing with issues of election law, is that right?
Yes.
And more specifically, you were involved in assisting the redistricting committees in the years that you were a legislative staffer, is that right?
Yes.
And what year did you start as a legislative staffer?
I started in 1985.
Okay. And so from 1985 until 2010, you were working for legislatures controlled by the Democratic Party, is that right?
At some points, the legislature had divided control. In the 1990s, there was a Republican-controlled House and a Democratic-controlled Senate. And in 2003 and 2004, there was a House that had an equal number of Democrats and Republicans and had a Republican co-speaker and a Democratic co-speaker.
All right. Thank you for reminding me of that. Did you assist legislators in the redistricting in the 1991 cycle of redistricting?
Yes.
And the legislature was controlled by Democrats at that time?
Yes.
And did you assist legislators with redistricting in 2001?
Yes.
With redistricting? And was the legislature then controlled by, both houses were controlled by Democrats?
Yes.
All right. Let me ask you a little bit. I think it's important for the court to understand how this process works. When you were drafting or assisting with the drafting of redistricting plans as a legislative staffer, did the legislator that you were working for have was he or she entitled to confidentiality of the work you were performing?
Yes. At the time that, while the process was going on.
Right. So as the plan was being drafted, the legislator was entitled to have it confidential unless it was introduced as a bill. Is that right?
Right. And also, after the bills were introduced, after a legislative plan was adopted, after a redistricting plan was enacted, any plan that had been, me see if I can remember the law, the plans that had been created as part of the process, even if they were alternative plans or amendments to plans, and even if they had not been introduced, became public.
Right. And it was not unusual for the initial drafting of the plans before they were introduced to be done in a confidential manner. Is that correct?
Right.
So they were drafted, one might say, before the plans were introduced, they were drafted in secret and then introduced for the public to see. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. When you were working as a legislative staffer on redistricting plans, was part of your job to analyze the compliance of various plans or amendments with the Voting Rights Act?
I would say so. I would advise that is something that I would have talked to the requester about, and answered questions that the requester.
And part of that would be advising on what were then the pre-clearance requirements under the Voting Rights Act, is that right?
Right.
And part of that would be also advising about whether the plan could be subject to a vote dilution claim under the Voting Rights Act under Section 2.
Yes. I'll say yes. I do not think that was a majority of what I would have done, but.
All right. Now, as it relates to this particular case, Mr. Gilkison, you recall that the maps that are being challenged here were drawn during the legislative process in the summer of 2017. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. And during that process, the House Democratic Caucus leader and the Senate Democratic Caucus leader introduced alternative plans. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And those plans were represented as the plans of the plaintiffs in the Covington case. Is that right?
I don't remember if that's how they were introduced. If that's how they were described by the sponsors. I don't remember that.
Okay. But in any event, you were the one who drew those maps, correct?
I was involved in drawing those maps, and I think I should say that this is beginning to get into territory where I am concerned about preserving attorney-client privilege.
Sure.
Because I was working with the litigation team. I'm an attorney, and I was working with the litigation team of the Covington plaintiffs.
Gotcha. And I've got a series of questions because I want to make sure that we respect that privilege and that the court understands the scope of the privilege you're claiming. But just to establish it, you drew the maps that the Democratic leaders introduced, and you drew them on behalf of the Covington plaintiffs, working with the lawyers for the Covington plaintiffs. Is that right?
I believe I can say that.
Okay. Now, today, here in court, you will not testify about any of the reasons behind why the districts were drawn the way they were in those maps, because you're claiming an attorney-client privilege. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you understand, you remember, don't you, that the Covington, I'm going to call them the Covington House and Senate plans. Is that fair?
That suits me.
I can call them the Gilkison plans or the Covington plans. You choose. What would you like me to call them?
I'd prefer the Covington plans.
Okay, I thought you might. So you understand and you recall, don't you, that the Covington House and Senate maps paired several Republican incumbents with Democratic incumbents. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And
You say several. I'm trying to think how, well, I will accept that there was at least more than one.
okay, all right,
More than one
all right,
pairing.
okay. But sitting here today, you are not going to discuss or tell the court why those members were paired because of the privilege you're claiming. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Now, you are also claiming a privileged relationship with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, who were representing the Covington plaintiffs. Is that right?
Yes.
And you are also claiming a privilege with an entity known as the Democracy Project 2. Is that correct?
Right.
And you are also claiming a privilege with the North Carolina Democratic Party with regard to these maps. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And regarding,
With some individuals in the Democratic Party.
okay, gotcha. What is Democracy Project 2? Do you know what entity that is?
It is a nonprofit organization.
And who is it led by?
I do not know very much about the structure of it. My contact with it was a man named Scott Fallman.
All right. And is Mr. Fallman also with a group known as Nexus Strategies?
Yes.
All right. And who are the principals at Nexus Strategies to your knowledge?
As I understand, they are Scott Fallman and Morgan Jackson.
Okay. So sitting here today, you're not going to disclose any communications you had with lawyers at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, are you?
No.
And you're not going to disclose any conversations about these maps that you had with Scott Fallman because of the privilege, is that right?
That's right.
And you're not going to discuss conversations you had with the leadership in the Democratic Party because of the privilege, is that correct?
That's right.
All right. When you were drawing the initial drafts of the Covington House and Senate maps, did you, well, let me ask you this, did you use Maptitude as a software?
Yes.
All right. And did you draw the initial drafts of those plans in your law office?
No.
All right. And you work for a firm called Bailey Dixon, is that correct?
I wouldn't say I work for the firm. I'm of counsel to the firm of Bailey Dixon, which is a contractual relationship.
All right. When you were drawing the initial drafts of the Covington House and Senate maps, where were you physically located when you were drawing those drafts?
For the most part, at Nexus Strategies, in the offices of Nexus Strategies.
Okay. Do you understand that the General Assembly has publicly available computer terminals where members of the public can come and draw maps? Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
All right. Did you at any time use those public terminals to draw the initial drafts of these Covington House and Senate maps?
I'm now wondering if I'm getting into the how of drawing maps. I'm wondering if I'm getting into privileged territory. I do have an attorney.
That's
here.
fine. I'll withdraw the question. That's no problem. And just for the record, Mr. Gilkinson is represented by Eric Fletcher with Brooks Pierce, who's here in the courtroom.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Gilkison, after drawing a first draft of the Covington House and Senate maps, you met with certain Democratic legislators regarding those drafts, didn't you?
I met with certain legislators during the process. I'm not sure it was, I'm not sure it was directly after the first draft.
All right.
I would hesitate to get into that because of the privilege, the process of.
Right. When you met with them, though, you had draft districts you could share with them, is that correct?
Yes,
All right. So on the House side, in terms of House Democratic legislators, you met with Representative Darren Jackson, is that right?
yes,
And he is the minority leader of the House Democratic Caucus, is that right?
yes,
And you met with nearly the entire Wake County House Democratic delegation, is that right?
yes,
And you met with most of the Mecklenburg County House Democratic delegation, didn't you?
yes,
And in all, you met with most of the House Democratic legislators at the end of the day, right?
yes,
All right. Now, on the Senate side, you met or spoke to Senator Dan Blue, is that correct?
yes,
And in all, you met with almost every Democratic member of the Senate in this process, is that right?
yes.
Now, when you met with these Democratic legislators about the Covington House and Senate maps, where did these meetings occur physically?
Well, some of them occurred on the phone, but the ones that were in person occurred physically at the offices of Nexus Strategies.
All right. And were members of the public invited to these meetings?
No.
All right.
Let me change that. I don't know.
All right. Did you ever invite any members of the media to come hear these discussions?
I don't remember doing so.
All right. And you didn't have an attorney-client relationship with any of these Democratic legislators, did you?
I think the answer to that is no.
All right. Okay. Now, sometimes you, as we discussed, you would meet with these legislators in sort of groups at a time. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. And sometimes you would meet with them just one-on-one. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And you would show them the draft versions of their districts when you met with them. Is that right?
Yes.
And you would allow them to provide input to you about those districts. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you would talk to them about how they wanted their district drawn, right?
I would listen.
Okay. And sometimes you accepted that input and changed districts as a result. Is that right?
I think I'm getting into, I think answering that would be a process, process answer that would go into privilege.
Okay. All right. During these meetings in general, Mr. Gilkison, you would discuss the political performance of your draft districts with these legislators, didn't you?
Political performance. Could you state what you mean there?
You would discuss with them whether the legislator had a good or bad chance of winning a district with those legislators, right?
Objection. Calls for hearsay statements by legislators.
Your Honor, I'm only asking number one, I'm not eliciting a statement. I'm just asking what the topics of the discussion were.
Overall.
Thank you, Your Honor. So you, Mr. Gilkison, just to try to repeat the question, you would discuss generally with the legislator whether they could be elected in the district that you had drawn in that particular map. Is that right?
That is a topic that did come up.
Okay. And another topic that did come up in these meetings were the racial statistics of certain of these districts. Is that correct?
Sometimes.
Which would include what we refer to as the BVAP, Black Voting Age Population levels of the districts, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, you discussed with Representative Darren Jackson the overall political performance of the Covington House map, didn't you?
I'm trying to remember a specific conversation with him about that, and I'm not getting the mental picture of that happening.
Gotcha. Let me be a little more specific. You discussed with Representative Jackson how the districts in the House Covington map performed politically using certain elections, including recent election data. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not remembering any specific conversation where that happened.
All right. Well, we'll take a look at your deposition transcript to assist you with that. Could we pull up the deposition transcript and hand out copies for the court and Mr. Gilkison? We're going to be at page 21. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Gilkison, I'm going to focus your attention in this transcript on page 21, and we're going to be looking at lines 5 through 12. And I'll read the question and you read the answer, and we'll see if that refreshes your memory. Beginning with line 5, question, what do you recall specifically or generally about discussing with Representative Jackson the political performance of the map, and what was your answer?
I said there probably were discussions about how different districts voted in certain elections.
And I said, all right, and you said?
Particularly recent elections.
All right, and is that in fact what you discussed with Representative Jackson?
I say probably here, and that probably was not a good answer to a question. So I'm gonna stay away from speculation.
Okay, thank you. And did you discuss with Representative Jackson the likely partisan breakdown of the Covington House map, what it would be in terms of Republicans versus Democrats?
Again, I'm not remembering a specific conversation to that effect, so I'm not going to speculate.
Okay, that's fair. Let's look at page 22 of the transcript that you have, and I'm going to focus you in on line number 3, and I'm going to read the question, and we're going to go down to line 24 because this was an exchange that we had. The question was, did Representative Jackson ever inquire of you as to what the likely partisan breakdown of the map would be of the Covington House map in terms of Republicans and Democrats? And what was your answer?
It sounds reasonable that that conversation might have occurred, but I don't specifically remember it.
And I said, all right, but it could have occurred. And then you said,
Could have.
all right, and I said, something makes you think that it could have, and Mr. Fletcher objected. And I went on to say, I just want to probe the memory a little bit. If you got something deep in the recesses of your mind that makes you say it could have happened, and what was your answer?
Well, that was the kind of thing that would have been talked about. I don't want to get into anything that would be privileged, that would discuss eventual litigation strategy, but yes, we would have talked about that kind of thing.
All right, so in fact, yes, you did discuss with Representative Jackson the likely partisan breakdown of the Covington House map. Is that true?
At this point, I would have to say that the person who answered that question there in the deposition was speculating.
You did not follow your lawyer's advice, it sounds like. I'm sorry about that. But you were the person in that deposition, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right, isn't it true that you also discussed with Senator Blue the political performance of the Covington Senate map?
I'm not remembering a specific conversation, so it would be speculation.
All right. Now, you had a conversation with Senator Paul Lowe about the draft district that he would live in under the Covington Senate map. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you discuss with him what his likely chances of election would be in the draft district?
I do remember that I did have that discussion.
All right. You also had a discussion with Senator Gladys Robinson about the draft district that she would be in. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you discussed with her the BVAP level of her district. Isn't that right?
I'm going to say yes.
All right. And in fact, Senator Robinson wanted you to draw a district that she could win. Is that right?
I'm going to say yes.
Okay. And
Although I do not remember her specifically asking for that.
okay. All right. And you met with most of the, you met with most of the Wake County House Democratic delegation, is that right?
The Wake County, yes.
All right. And you discussed with them in that meeting the likely political performance of the Wake County House districts that you would draw, is that right?
I'm trying to specifically remember that. I'm going to say yes, we did.
Okay, and that specifically included how likely each member of that delegation would be to win their election under the districts you've drawn, is that right?
I remember certain people bringing that kind of thing up.
Okay. And you also discussed the BVAP levels of some of those districts with the members in that meeting, is that right?
With some of them, yes.
All right, okay. And you had a separate discussion with Representative Billy Richardson about the draft district that he lived in, correct?
Yes,
And Representative Richardson is from Cumberland County, is that right?
that's right.
And was it the case that Representative Richardson had a problem with one of the precincts that was left out of that district?
That's right.
Okay. And the problem that he had with that was that it would hurt him politically if the precinct wasn't in the district. Isn't that what you recall?
That's my recollection.
Now, you also, in meeting with these legislators, some of the legislators were concerned about the district that you had drawn because of the way it would have to be redrawn by the county grouping formula. Do you recall that?
Well, you say they expressed concern?
Well, let me focus you in on a specific meeting. You
Okay.
met with Senator Angela Bryan, is that correct?
Yes.
And her district was going to have to change under your map because of the county grouping formula, isn't that right?
That's right.
Okay. And so wasn't it the case that her district was going to be worse for her politically because of the change required by the Constitution?
That's right.
Okay. And the same was true for Representative George Graham, is that right?
That's right.
And so the reality of, because the county grouping rule was going to change his district, the district he was going to be in was not going to be as good for him politically as the prior district, was it?
That's right.
And the same was true for Representative Reeves in Chatham County, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the way the county grouping formula was going to change his district, it would not be as politically favorable for him going forward, is that right?
That is my recollection.
Okay. Now, in the Guilford County House districts, you had a meeting with Representative Pricey Harrison, is that right?
Yes.
And you discussed with Representative Harrison pairing her up with Representative Hardister, is that right?
I believe that's correct.
All right, and Representative Harrison is a Democrat, correct?
Yes.
And Representative Hardister is a Republican, correct?
Yes.
And in connection with that discussion, you also discussed with Representative Harrison the likely political performance of that district, correct?
I'm not sure I remember that.
All right. You had a meeting with Representative Evelyn Terry, is that right?
Yes.
And you discussed your draft district that she would live in with her also, correct?
Yes.
And you had a particular discussion about the BVAP level in that district, is that right?
I believe so.
Okay. All right. Let me change gears to another topic, Mr. Gilkison. You also provided, you're familiar with, aren't you, with the simulated House and Senate maps that were produced as a result of a project by Common Cause?
Yes.
All right. And you understand that 2 law students sat in front of a computer and drafted those plans, is that right?
Yes.
And you assisted them at times with that, is that correct?
Yes.
And once the plans were drafted, you performed a Voting Rights Act analysis of their draft plan, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you, after recommending a few changes, you considered both the House and the Senate Common Cause maps to be VRA compliant, is that right?
Yes, at that time I did.
All right. And in terms of just process, the law students drew the districts without using any racial data, is that right?
That is my understanding. That is my understanding and recollection.
Right. And so then on the back end, you reviewed the racial statistics of the drafted districts for VRA compliance, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you did recommend a few changes to, I think it was the House map, is that correct?
Yes. I don't believe I recommended any Senate changes to the Senate map at all.
All right. And where you did recommend changes in the House Common Cause map, your recommendations generally were to increase the BVAP level of the district. Is that right?
Well, I'm not sure I focused on BVAP entirely, but I looked at the ability of minority voters to elect, to have an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice, which is what the Voting Rights Act's purpose is, and recommended some increases. In one case, I think it was an increase in Native American presence in a district.
All right. And you're familiar with House District 7, is that right?
Yes.
And you recommended an increase in the BVAP level in that particular district, didn't you?
I think that was the number.
Okay. Now, in connection with your work on the Covington House and Senate maps, did you create a chart comparing certain data about those maps with the enacted map?
Yes.
And you prepared one chart for the House and one chart for the Senate, is that right?
Yes.
And for instance, the chart for the House compared between those two plans the number of districts in each of those plans that had a BVAP level of over 40%. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
All right. And on that same chart, you had some other columns which showed how many districts in each plan had been won by certain candidates in the past. Is that right?
That's right.
So for instance, the chart compared the number of districts in each plan that had been won, for instance, by President Obama in 2008. Is that right?
That's my memory.
And you also compared between the two plans the number of districts carried by Governor Cooper in 2016. Is that right?
I remember that.
And you also compared between the two plans the number of districts carried by Attorney General Stein in 2016. Is that right?
Yeah, that, I'm not looking at it, so
Sure. I promise we'll look at it in just a moment. But do you also recall comparing the number of districts in each of those maps that were carried by Chairman Wayne Goodwin in 2016?
I'm not sure of that, but I guess we'll see.
All right. And you performed a similar chart for the Covington Senate map as compared to the enacted map. Is that right?
Yes.
And I assume that sitting here right now, you don't recall by memory the specific number of districts that were in each column, do you?
No.
All right. So if we could hand Legislative Defendants Exhibits 259 and 260, we'll look at them together. Your Honor, I just want to note for the court, these were marked by Mr. Gilkison as highly confidential, but I've obtained permission from Mr. Gilkison and his lawyer to show them at trial.
All right. And I'm assuming, since they're being shown at trial, that there's no objection to them being placed on the publicly available website.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. Yes.
So, Mr. Gilkison, I'm going to focus first on Exhibit 260, which is the chart for the house plan. Do you see that?
Yes.
And does this appear to be the chart that you created?
Yes.
All right. And the first row is for the 2011 enacted house plan. Is that correct?
Right.
And then the second row, it says 2017 post-final remedy house plan. Is that what became the Covington house plan?
I am going to, I think this would get it, this gets into process of, and would be covered by privilege.
So whether the words post-final remedy house plan equal the Covington house plan, you're saying that would be privileged?
Yes.
Okay. The 2017 post-final remedy house plan, though, is a house plan you drew, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Drew, at least in the sense of putting it on maptitude.
All right. And so I just want to look at a few of these numbers. The first column says districts with BVAP 40% plus. Do you see that?
Right.
And so in the 2011 enacted house plan, there were 25 of those districts. Is that what that says?
That's what that says.
And in the 2017 post-final remedy house plan, there were 19 of those districts, correct?
Yes.
And so then if you look over at the column called districts carried by Obama 2008, in the 2011 enacted house plan, there were 42 of those districts, correct?
Right.
And in the 2017 post-final remedy house plan, there were 55, right?
Right.
And in the next column for districts carried by Cooper 2016, there are 48 for the 2011 enacted house plan, correct?
Right.
And 53 for the 2017 post-final remedy house plan, right?
Right.
And in the next column, districts carried by Stein 2016, there are 47 for the 2011 enacted house plan, correct?
Yes.
And there are 54 for the 2017 post-final remedy house plan, correct?
Yes.
And in the districts carried by Goodwin 2016, there are 44 for the 2011 enacted house plan, correct?
Yes.
And 55 for the 2017 post-final remedy house plan, correct?
Yes.
And you created this chart, correct?
Yes.
And so you put this BVAP statistic alongside the election data statistics, correct?
Well, it's not right alongside of it. There are a couple of other columns in between.
And those also deal with racial statistics, correct?
Racial and party statistics.
All right. So that's fair to say this chart is a combination of a rate of racial and election data statistics, correct?
Right, racial, voter registration, party voter registration, and election statistics.
Okay.
That middle column also involves Democratic Party registration.
Right. And so on this chart for the House plan, where the districts with BVAP of 40% plus, where the number of those districts went down, the number of districts carried by these Democratic candidates went up. Is that correct?
Where the BVAP went down.
When the number of districts with that level of BVAP went down, the number of districts carried by these Democratic candidates went up, correct?
Excuse me. If you just look at those things, yes.
Okay, and so let's look at Exhibit 259. This is your corresponding chart for the Senate plan, correct?
Yes.
And so on this chart, districts with BVAP of 40% plus, there were 10 in the 2011 enacted Senate plan and 8 in the 2017 final remedy plan, correct?
Yes.
And will you acknowledge that the 2017 final remedy plan is the Covington Senate map?
I'm not sure of that.
Okay. But the 2017...
And it would, it raises concerns about privilege.
Sure. But the 2017 final remedy plan is a plan that you drew, correct?
Yes.
All right. And when we look at the districts carried by Obama 2008, there were 17 of those in the 2011 enacted Senate plan and 22 in the 2017 final remedy plan. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And districts carried by Cooper 2016, there were 21 in the 2011 enacted Senate plan and 21 in the 2017 final remedy plan, correct?
That's correct.
And in the districts carried by Stein 2016, there were 19 in the 2011 enacted Senate plan and 22 in the 2017 final remedy plan, correct?
Yes.
And in the districts carried by Goodwin 2016, there were 20 in the 2011 enacted Senate plan and 22 in the 2017 final remedy plan. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And so other than the districts carried by Cooper 2016, again, where the number of districts with BVAP 40% went down, then the number of districts carried by Democratic candidates went up. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's all the questions I have for now.
Cross-examination, Dr. Clemens. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Gilkison. I'm Stanton Jones, and I represent the plaintiffs in this case.
Good morning.
So you were asked several questions about the confidentiality of the redistricting process during the period of time in which you worked in the General Assembly. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And I believe you testified that during the time you were there, the process could be largely confidential before a redistricting plan was enacted. Do I have that right?
Right.
Okay. And do I also have it right that after a redistricting plan was enacted, the materials, the map-making process would largely be made public, be made available to members of the public? Is that right?
That's my recollection.
Okay. And the purpose of making those records public is so that members of the public can gain an understanding and an insight of the map-making process that led to an enacted redistricting plan for the House or the Senate in North Carolina, right?
That may have been part of the purpose. As I understand it, an additional purpose was so the enacted plan could be more easily, that it was to facilitate the submission process for pre-clearance under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act.
Thank you, sir. You were also asked a number of questions about what Mr. Strack referred to as the Covington House and Senate maps. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
Okay. And am I right, those were proposed House and Senate maps that you participated in drawing in 2017, right?
Right.
Okay. Am I also right that none of those maps were ever enacted by the General Assembly, were they?
No.
Okay. Those maps that you participated in drawing, they never passed the North Carolina House of Representatives, did they?
No.
Okay. And they didn't pass the North Carolina Senate either, did they?
No.
Okay. So all of those questions that you were asked about these Covington House and Senate maps, as they were referred to, and communications that you had with legislators about those proposed maps, all of those questions were about maps that were never enacted into law, right?
Right.
Okay. And that's because Democrats weren't in control of the redistricting process in 2017, were they?
No.
Okay. The maps that were enacted in 2017, you understand, were drawn by or on behalf of the Republican legislative leaders at the time, right?
Right.
Okay. And that's because Republicans had supermajority control of both chambers of the General Assembly at that time, right?
Well, I don't even think they needed supermajority control. Because redistricting plans are not subject to the governor's veto. They had majority control, and that was enough.
So majority control alone allowed the Republicans in control of the General Assembly to draw the maps in 2017, right?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't work on drawing the maps, House and Senate maps, that the General Assembly actually enacted in 2017, did you?
Not at all.
You were asked some questions about a simulation project that was hosted by Common Cause, where a pair of students from this law school, from Campbell Law School, drew some maps. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
Okay. In connection with that Campbell Law project, you didn't conduct a localized analysis of racially polarized block voting for purposes of the third jingles factor, did you?
No, I did not do any sophisticated statistical analysis at all.
Okay. And likewise, you didn't conduct an analysis of the first jingles factor, whether African Americans could constitute a majority of the voting age population in a reasonably compact district in the relevant geographic area. You didn't do that work either, did you?
I'm struggling with that because I could see what the percentages were in the area and whether there could be a majority or not. But in terms of any kind of sophisticated statistical analysis, if one was needed, I didn't do it. I mean, I have no training in statistics.
No further questions.
Intervening defendants, any cross-examination? No. To the state? Read your answers, sir.
Just one question, Your Honor. Mr. Gilkison, the way you did your VRA analysis of the Common Cause simulation maps, isn't it true that you did that analysis the same way you had done VRA analysis when you were a legislative staffer of redistricting plans?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can answer that question. I'm not sure I know how to answer that question.
Let me ask you this. When you were a legislative staffer analyzing VRA compliance of redistricting plans, you didn't do statistical analysis back then either, did you?
Well, it depends on what kind of analysis it was. I mean, I would not have done any kind of regression analysis or whatever the things are that you can do if you have statistical training. I would not have done that, but
Thank you, Your Honor. We have no further questions. We thank Mr. Gilkison for his time.
Thank you, sir. Step down. If you'll return those exhibits to the, let's see, who presented those? Mr. Strack, I believe, handed you exhibits.
Good morning, Your Honors.
Good morning.
Our next witness, we call Representative John Bell to the stand. While he's making his way to the stand, I'll pass out a witness binder for him.
Please remain standing. Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. May I approach you?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Your Honors. Good morning, Representative Bell. Could you please state your name for the record?
John Richard Bell IV.
And are you currently a representative in the North Carolina House of Representatives?
Yes.
Okay. And from which district?
House District 10.
Okay. When were you first elected to House District 10?
I was elected in the 2012 election and started my service in 2013.
And do you currently serve as the House Majority Leader?
Yes.
And in 2017, did you serve on any committee related to redistricting?
Yes.
And then in 2018, did you serve any role within your party related to candidate recruitment?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that role?
It's my job as majority leader to help our conference chair to recruit candidates and focus on winning elections.
Let's start by taking a look at the map of House districts in 2018 election. Those are located at the first tab in your binder. This is LDTX1. So, Representative Bell.
I need a bigger desk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Looking at this map, can you describe where your House district is located?
Yes. Would you like me to proceed?
Yes, please. Thank you.
I live in House District 10, which is in Wayne County, covers Olive Green, a portion of Wayne, and a small piece of Johnson in eastern North Carolina.
And how would you describe the political concerns of your region?
Our area is a conservative and trending conservative area. Conservative area. I apologize. I'll try to speak clearer. We have a conservative area focused on really three main issues right now. The first is agriculture. It's our largest economic impact, not in our area, but our state. We have a lot of business. Okay. Agriculture is our largest economic impact. We have a lot of agriculture and industry in our area. We also have a large military presence with Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, so anything dealing with military issues is important in our district. Also, after the recent hurricanes of Matthew and Florence, disaster recovery is a major issue in our area.
And how would politics in your region of the state compare to other regions in the state?
Well, first it goes back to the issues that we're facing. One, you have the urban-rural divide. So we live in a predominantly rural area. Our issues, let's take transportation, for example. If you look at our issues dealing with transportation, we're looking at connectivity, whether it be to Raleigh, whether it be to Greenville. In more urban areas, they're looking at congestion. And we have, our big issue right now, of course, is agriculture and some of the issues that have been going on around our agriculture industry. And then we have major issues with hurricane recovery. And so that is where our focus is right now.
And how would your focus there compare to, say, a focus in a city like Charlotte?
Completely different issues.
How so?
We're a socially conservative area. Our agriculture industry is a huge presence. We have population decreases. We have small towns that have infrastructure issues. We have some of our communities are actually gone due to devastating Hurricane Matthew and Florence. Economic development's an issue in our area. You do not have those type of issues in urban areas such as Charlotte or Wake County.
We heard testimony from expert witnesses last week that the General Assembly is out of step with other elected offices in the state of North Carolina. Would you agree with that statement?
No.
And why not?
If you look at our state, you're seeing a trend now to where your rural areas are becoming more conservative. Your urban areas are becoming more liberal. If you look at the state as a whole, in the last election, President Trump won the election, yet we have a Democratic governor. Yet our lieutenant governor received more votes than our president and current governor. I think our council state and also our General Assembly reflects the views of North Carolina.
And in your work in the legislature, do you ever work across the aisle, that is to say, with Democrats?
Absolutely.
Okay. And who is Senator Don Davis?
Senator Davis and I have shared Wayne County and Greene County since I've been in the General Assembly.
Okay. And is he a Republican or a Democrat?
He's a Democrat.
And do you work with him on issues of import to your region?
Absolutely.
Okay. And how about officials within your district? Do you work with Democratic elected officials in your district?
The short answer is yes, but I'm elected by all the people in House District 10, so I have to work with everyone within the district. We do have a number of small town mayors that are Democrat. That's not a factor. We have to all unite because our issues are different, and so we work together to do everything that we can to better our citizens.
How many of the mayors in your district do you estimate are Democrats?
I'd have to go through and label, but I'm pretty sure Snow Hill, Hookerton, Fremont, Goldsboro, Princeton. I frankly haven't checked their registration. We just all work together.
Okay. And have you supported Democratic mayors in appointments, say, to committees?
Yes,
Okay, how so?
they were the right person for the job.
Okay. Can you give us an example?
Yes, Mayor Chuck Allen of Goldsboro, I recommended his appointment to the North Carolina Military Affairs Commission. He's got a great handle of the issues on the military. He's been very active in our military community with the Friends of Seymour, but also our local Military Affairs Committee. He understands the needs of our airmen outside and inside the base, and he was the right fit.
In this case, plaintiffs have alleged that Democratic voters in North Carolina do not have an equal opportunity to translate their votes into representation. First, do you agree with plaintiffs that Democratic voters go unrepresented in House districts held by Republicans?
No,
And why not?
I represent a lot of Democrats. Personally, I'm a Republican. I represent a lot of Democrats within my district. I'm well aware that without Democrat support and unaffiliated support, I did not get elected. And those are the people that sent me here to Raleigh.
And do you engage in providing constituency services to residents in your district?
Yes.
Okay. And do you provide those services based on whether a constituent is a Republican or a Democrat?
No, we try to help as many people as possible within our avenues.
And I understand that you are the House Majority Leader. Do you believe that Republican members in the House provide the same level of constituency services to their constituents, regardless of those constituents' political leaning?
Yes. If not, we have problems. That's a big issue with me. The easiest way to get reelected is being top-notch in constituent service, and that's what we try to focus on. And if we have a member that's slipping in that area, we try to add support to help them out.
I'd like to ask you about the makeup of the Republican caucus in the North Carolina legislature. Do you see variation on political issues in the Republican caucus?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain that to the court?
I wish you could come to Republican caucus. That would answer all your questions. We have folks that lean very hard right. We have some that are moderate. We have some that are in the middle. It can be very entertaining and challenging at the same time. And I like to say it's leading a wheelbarrow full of frogs, trying to keep everybody calm to get from point A to point B with a bunch of different opinions and ways to get there. Our caucus has a tendency of being very independent in their thinking. And just because I'm the majority leader doesn't mean I have the votes within the caucus. We actually have a lot of debate within our caucus.
And have you seen a similar variation in the Democratic caucus too?
Not so much this session, but in past sessions, yes.
I heard you talk about a rural and urban divide. I wanted to ask you if it's possible that a rural Democrat shares more in common with a rural Republican than an urban Democrat.
Yes.
And can you explain that?
You gave a good example of Senator Don Davis and myself. Not only are we colleagues within the same district, but we're friends, and we understand the needs of our district, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be a nonprofit grant, whether it be issues affecting our military. Those are all issues we work together on. It's bigger than party.
Do you believe that the way an electoral map is drawn determines the outcome of any given election, or are other factors at play?
Other factors.
And can you identify for the court some of those other factors that are at play in elections?
Mood of the country, mood of the state, local issues that affect the local candidates, candidate recruitment, all those go into to determine who's going to win that election.
Would you include constituency services as an issue?
Absolutely.
Would you consider incumbency as a deciding
Absolutely.
factor? Pardon me. Let me ask that again so it's clear, and pardon me,
Okay.
Representative. Would you consider incumbency as a factor that goes into the result of an election?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you about the next election in North Carolina. Do presidential elections increase voter turnout compared to non-presidential elections?
To my limited experience, yes.
And do you expect that voter turnout will be higher in 2020 than it was in 2018?
That's what we're planning, yes.
Now, related to this case, are you aware that some of plaintiff's witnesses have discussed what they call a seawall against a Democratic majority?
I don't believe there's a seawall, but in all honesty, I have done everything I possibly can over the last couple of years to not be involved in redistricting because I did not want to be here today. Unfortunately, I failed. So I have not even, I don't take questions on redistricting. I try not to even watch the news. So I can't tell you what other people have said. I really have tried really hard not to meet you here today for the first time.
Now, based on your experience, if the Democratic candidate for president wins North Carolina in the next election, is it likely that the Democratic Party in North Carolina will pick up seats in the House?
Yes.
Okay. Possibly even a majority?
Yes.
Let's turn to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 48. It's the next tab in your binder. Now, Representative Bell, the record reflects that this exhibit shows election results from the 2018 House elections. Could you walk through this document and tell the court which seats would be competitive in the next election?
Object, Your Honor. I think this is veering into expert analysis. There's been no definition of what competitive is or basis that this witness has the ability to go through and present expert opinion on the competitiveness of various races.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is squarely within North Carolina Rule of Evidence 701, which is opinion testimony by a lay witness that goes to his perception of the matters at issue and goes to a fact at issue before the court.
I think we need some foundation as to what a definition of competitive is for this lay witness. And then I think we can evaluate whether it strays into the realm of an expert opinion or lay opinion.
Representative Bell, do I understand correctly that in the 2018 election, you were responsible for candidate recruitment for the Republican caucus?
Yes, I was one of the few members responsible for that.
Okay. And as part of that responsibility, did you need to identify which elections in the state might be competitive?
Yes.
Okay. And based on that experience, what was your perception of which districts in the North Carolina House might be competitive in the next election?
Objection, Your Honor. I think it still is asking for expert opinion, and there's still been no definition of what we're even talking about here when there are questions about what is and isn't competitive.
And Your Honor, on that point, first, I've established that he was responsible for candidate recruitment for the Republican caucus in the House. I've also identified that in order to perform that duty, he would have had to determine which elections were competitive. I am asking him about his perception of which districts are competitive in the House. Rule 701 of the North Carolina Rules of Evidence has two requirements for opinion testimony by a lay witness. Number one, that it's based on his perception. We've established that. Number two, that it relates to an issue before the court. The issue of whether these districts are competitive are before the court. And pardon me, Your Honor, one more point. As we go through, I can ask him as we walk through how he decided that this particular district was competitive. I think that's a district by district issue, Your Honor, and we'll be eliciting that testimony.
Your Honor, just very briefly, the rule limits testimony by opinion testimony by a non-expert to that which will be, quote, helpful to a clear understanding of the witness's testimony or the determination of a fact and issue. I'm not sure that his testimony of some undefined notion of competitiveness in a future election without any basis in sort of an expert analysis is helpful.
Again, Your Honor, I can ask the question of whether he thought Republicans could win these districts. If plaintiffs are uncomfortable with the word competitive, we can rephrase it. But again, we believe we are squarely within the rule that plaintiffs' counsel just recited to the court, as I described earlier.
And I don't speak for the bench here because we haven't conferred, but I'm still concerned about what his definition of competitiveness is. I understand that as House Majority Leader, he has that obligation, but based on the line of questions, I don't know whether he's being informed by experts as to what competitive districts are. So I think I need to know what goes into his understanding of what makes a district competitive before I can decide whether this is within his perception, which is Part A of Rule 701.
I understand. Thank you, Your Honor. Let me clear that up. Representative Bell, what goes into your understanding of whether Republicans can win a district in North Carolina?
Local issues, if I've got a good candidate or not, voter turnout, moves of the state, moves of the country, moves of the district, regional issues, all those go into play if we feel like we can be competitive in a district or not.
And in understanding the issue of whether Republicans can win or whether Republicans are competitive, in addition to your experience that you just described, do you rely on any expert's definition of competitive?
For me personally, competitive is if I can win or not win.
Objections at the vote.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Representative Bell, we are in Legislative Defendants Exhibit 48. And where we were was I was asking you if you could walk through this document and tell the court which seats you think Republicans can, which seats would be competitive in an election, in the next election in North Carolina.
Okay, if it's okay, I'll just go through the districts, starting at District 1. District 1, I had a real good candidate there. We felt like we could be competitive in that district. Representative Goodwin actually ran statewide. If that's an open seat, we do have some concerns there. Representative Larry Yarborough, that's a district that without an incumbent, they actually in the last election ran a very, very good candidate. Without an incumbent, that district would be competitive and in play. District 4 can be very competitive. That's a very heavy agriculture district. Incumbency mattered there. District 6 is very competitive. Two really good candidates. Voter turnout was the issue there in the last election. An open seat can make that very competitive. District 9 could be very competitive depending on the candidate, and that deals with Pitt County and the medical community, where Vidant Hospital and ECU, where the University of East Carolina is. Representative Chris Humphrey, District 12, an open seat there can be very competitive. That's going to be very competitive anyway by the makeup of the district. District 14, incumbency matters there. District 19, District 20, so New Hanover County is turning into a more urban. District 19 and District 20, that district is turning into a more urban area where it was ruled at one time. The city of Wilmington is really growing. City of Wilmington, yes. District 22 will be competitive, very competitive. That seat has Representative William Brisson, who was a longtime Democrat member, but has changed his registration to Republican. Representative Donna White in District 26. District 44, District 45, District 46, District 47, District 51, District 53, District 59, District 62, District 63, District 64. All those, if they were open seats, would be very competitive. Incumbency matters in all those seats. District 66. District 74, 75. District 82, 83, '93, '103, 104, 108, 109, 113, 118, 119. That's just a quick look of districts that
Thank you, Representative Bell. Now, this is by my rough count, based on your testimony, but it appears to me that you estimate that there are more than 35 seats that would be competitive in the next election. Is it possible that in the 2020 election, Democrats can overcome a purported seawall against gaining a majority?
yes.
And is that for some of the reasons you just described?
Yes, I've not, I would have to go back and look, but incumbency plays a huge role here, local issues, voter turnout, candidate recruitment, of course, open seats, all those go into to the issues there.
Now, stepping back a little bit, is it your understanding that the legislature will be required to enact a new redistricting plan before the 2022 elections?
I feel like everything we've done over the last 10 years has been redistricting. But according to the census in 2020, we're required to do that going into the 2022 session, if I'm not mistaken.
So the current enacted plan will only be in place for, at most, one more election, is that right?
I believe so.
I'd like to ask you about a few allegations made by plaintiffs in this case. Plaintiffs allege that during the 2018 election, Democratic supporters were harmed in their ability to associate or affiliate together. Do you agree?
Objection.
No.
Calls for a legal conclusion. The rights of the freedom of expression and association are protected constitutional rights that this witness can't comment on.
Your Honor, I'm not asking him about the Constitution. I'm asking him about whether he saw Democratic supporters being harmed in their ability to associate or affiliate. This is fact witness testimony about whether Democratic supporters were able to do the very things that plaintiffs claim they were prevented from doing.
I think it's the same issue I had with the last series of questions you've asked about whether folks have an opportunity to associate and affiliate, and I'd need to know what definition he's applying to that, because I imagine the plaintiffs in their pleadings have a very specific definition that's applied to that. So in order to determine whether this is helpful to the court, we'd need to know how he would define those terms.
Representative Bell, how would you define whether Democratic supporters are able to associate together?
Gathering, organizing.
Would you include supporting their candidates of choice?
Yes.
Okay. And did you run for election in the 2018 election?
Yes.
Okay. And were you familiar with other candidates who were running in the 2018 House election in North Carolina?
Yes.
Okay. And were you familiar with voter support for both sides of candidates in the 2018 House election?
Yes.
Okay. And based on your experience of looking at the 2018 election and understanding your definition of association, did you see Democratic supporters associating in 2018 to support their political candidates of choice?
Yes.
Okay. And were you also a candidate in elections prior to the 2018 election?
Yes.
Okay. And your experience in those elections, was it similar to what we just described as your experience in the 2018 election as far as your familiarity with voter support for different candidates?
Yes.
Okay. And in the 2018 election, did you see any decrease in support from Democratic voters for their candidates in the way that they associated?
No.
Okay. Can you describe that to the court, please?
Our Democrat candidates are very organized. They always have people at the polls. Their party headquarters is always bumping. They're very engaged in the election process.
And were they engaged in the election process in 2018?
They've always been engaged in the process.
Okay. Now, based on your experience running in different elections, both before the 2017 map was enacted and after, was it your understanding that voter turnout was depressed after the 2017 map was enacted?
No.
Specific to your House District 10, what is the rough ratio of registered Democratic voters to registered Republican voters?
I have to go back and really look, but I think I have a slight edge of Republican, Democrat coming second, and then unaffiliated a very close third. So I have a pretty good mixture.
Okay.
But I have to go back and look at the numbers. I don't have those in front of me.
Okay. Your Honors, I'm moving on to a next unit. I don't know if you want to take a break. I'm happy to keep moving forward, but wanted to
Let's
offer.
be a good time.
Okay.
Take a 15-minute recess, so we go ahead and do that now and resume at, it's like about 5 minutes till 11.
Back in session.
Ms. McKnight?
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Representative Bell, understanding that you served a role within your party related to candidate recruitment in 2018, I'd like to ask you some questions about candidates in that election for House districts in North Carolina and your understanding of candidate quality and politics at issue in those areas. Let's use plaintiffs' own maps to illustrate this discussion. And let's start with your own county grouping. And to follow along, we will start by looking at how your county grouping is mapped out in the amended complaint. This is the third tab in your binder. We will be turning to page 38. Am I right to understand, Representative Bell, that your own House district is located within this county grouping?
Yes,
Okay. And that's House District 10 on the eastern side?
correct.
Okay. Now, to frame this for the court, plaintiffs concede in their complaint that House Districts 21 and 22 were redrawn by the special master. And plaintiffs do not make any allegations about your own district, House District 10. So therefore, our discussion today is going to focus on the remaining House districts. Those are districts 26, 28, 51, and 53. Now, looking at those four House districts, understanding that this is your own county grouping, I have a question for you about a point that plaintiffs allege. They allege that the General Assembly cracked the Democratic pockets of Johnston, Harnett, and Lee counties into four separate districts. Those are districts 26, 28, 53, and 51, so that none of these four districts would lean towards Democrats. I was quoting there from the first amended complaint at paragraphs 136 through 137. Do you agree, Representative Bell, that Democratic pockets of Johnston, Harnett, and Lee counties were cracked into four separate districts?
Objection,
No.
Your Honor. The sword shield doctrine, which we've briefed and already have an in limine ruling from this court, precludes legislative defendants from introducing any evidence or testimony, and I'm just reading from the court's in limine order, any evidence or testimony that derives directly or indirectly from non-public information provided by or communications with the legislators who have invoked legislative privilege, or any evidence or testimony otherwise seeking to explain the General Assembly's intent in drawing any of these districts, unless such testimony or evidence is based exclusively on the public legislative record or publicly available data. And I don't believe there's been any foundation laid as to what the basis for this witness's testimony is going to be. To the extent the basis is anything other than exclusively publicly available legislative record or other publicly available data, it's clearly barred by the court's in limine ruling on the sword shield doctrine.
Yes, Your Honor. So what plaintiff's counsel is quoting from is the court's order in March. I'm looking at it right here.
No, that's not right. I was quoting from the court's order a couple days ago.
Pardon me, Your
Go
Honor.
ahead.
Okay, sure. And I'd welcome him to speak when it's his turn. For now, I'd focus on the court's March order, in which, in a footnote, the court was responding to a motion by plaintiffs related to legislative privilege. The first issue is that we are not providing the court with testimony from any of the 12 individuals who asserted privilege in this case. Plaintiffs, I'm sure, would concede that Representative Bell did not assert legislative privilege. Second, I am not eliciting testimony about the legislature's intent. Rather, as I've already laid the foundation for, I am asking Representative Bell about the county grouping in which his own district resides. Earlier today, before the break, he laid foundation for why he knows about both his area and the politics related to that area, whether and the composition of his district. Now, another important point: the court issued a summary ruling on July 10 from the July 10 hearings, where it stated, quote, "Legislative defendants are not precluded from offering evidence from legislators who have not asserted legislative privilege." That is what we are offering now. Again, we are not offering evidence of intent. We are offering testimony from Representative Bell based on his own experience and understanding of his district.
Your Honor, you finished?
Yes,
Yeah.
thanks.
Apologize for speaking out of turn before. Just to clarify, I was reading earlier from the court's order on outstanding pretrial motions, which is dated July 17th. That's just a few days ago. This is the court's in limine ruling granting our motion in limine on this exact issue. And it says exactly the things that I read, including that legislative defendants are precluded from putting on any evidence or testimony about the General Assembly's intent unless it is based exclusively on the public legislative record or publicly available data. And to be clear, the question of whether these districts are, whether the Democratic voters in these districts are cracked, that is absolutely a question that goes to intent. Cracking and packing voters is intentional partisan gerrymandering. That's what this whole case is about.
We're going to sustain the objection. He, as a person with presumably personal knowledge of this geographic area, he resides in this cluster, he's run for office in this cluster, can certainly testify about his personal experience as to where Democrats are located, where Republicans are located, but we agree with the plaintiff that the use of the term cracked is directly tied to an intent of a map drawer, as we've been using it throughout this trial. Whether something is cracked or packed is a term of art that we believe connotes intent. But if you're talking about geography, political geography of a cluster that's based on his personal observation, that would be permitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Representative Bell, looking at the map on page 38, again, focusing on districts 28, 26, 53, and 51, would you say you are familiar with the the districts, the geographic area that makes up districts 28, 26, 53, and 51.
I'm familiar.
Okay. And are you familiar with some of the political makeup of those districts?
Yes, some of it.
Okay. And do you believe, and here I ask you to take care, I am not interested in any intent of a legislature. I am focused on your belief as a representative from this area, understanding the makeup of these districts. Do you believe, and let me step back, are you able to identify for the court the areas of Johnston, Harnett, and Lee counties on this map?
Yes.
Okay, and where are those counties?
District 26 and 28 would be Johnston County, 53 would be Harnett, and then 51 is Lee.
And based on your understanding of where those counties are and your understanding of the geography in that area, do you believe that Democratic voters are divided in a way among these districts that is unreasonable?
No, these are more conservative rural areas.
Can you tell the court, and I'll go district by district here, I'd like to ask you about candidate quality and political issues related to these different House districts. And starting in District 26, where we had Donna White as the Republican candidate and Linda Bennett as the Democratic candidate, could you tell the court about any candidate quality or political issues in relation to that district?
Yes.
Okay.
In District 26, it is a socially conservative area. Representative White reflects that. She is also a longtime serving school board member and extremely popular in the area. So she had a lot of name ID, serves the area well, and very popular.
And so in District 28, the Republican candidate was Larry Strickland and the Democratic candidate was Jimmy Massengill. There was a third-party candidate named Walt Rabon. Pardon my pronunciation. Could you tell the court a little bit about candidate quality and political issues in that district?
Another social conservative area, Representative Strickland is a social conservative. He's also a longtime school board member for Johnston County as well. He is very active in the agriculture community, was a state employee, a retired state employee, and very well known in the area. The Johnston County overall has a very robust and active Republican Party, women's groups. The majority of elected officials within that county are Republican, from state senate all the way down through school board and a lot of your municipalities.
Moving to District 51, where the Republican candidate was John Sauls and the Democratic candidate was Lisa Mathis. Could you tell the court about candidate quality and political issues in that district in 2018?
That would be another socially conservative area. Representative Sauls is actually serving in his second stint. He served a number of years before in the General Assembly and ran for re-election. Took some absence, and then we were able to recruit him to come back and ran. He's a very well-known minister in the area and very popular. He's liked by a lot of people.
And who is Mike Stone?
Mike Stone is the former Republican representative that had that district before I came in and in my first term in the General Assembly.
Okay. And do you have anything to say about candidate quality related to Mike Stone?
Yes, Representative Stone was really involved in a lot of local issues that turned very decisive in the community. He also was involved in the fracking discussion that went on, which Lee County was in the forefront of that. And Representative Stone lost re-election to I would consider a social conservative, moderate Democrat, I believe Brad Salmon. And Representative Salmon served a term, and then Representative Sauls unseated Representative Salmon.
So did candidates matter there?
Absolutely.
Okay. And do you believe that District 51 is a lock for Republican representatives?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Now let's move on to District 53, where we had the Republican candidate of David Lewis and the Democratic candidate of Richard Chapman. Could you tell the court about candidate quality and political issues in that area?
Another social conservative area, agriculture, main focus there. Representative Lewis is a longtime representative from Harnett County. He's very active in the community, constituent services. He has a team that does an outstanding job. Alumni of Campbell University, extremely popular in the area. I believe the court knows Representative Lewis well.
Now, understanding you're focused on candidate recruitment and you are the House Majority Leader, if you had open seats in any of the districts in this county grouping in this next election, any open seats that are currently held by Republicans, do you have concern about the Republican Party winning those districts?
Are we just talking about the four?
Yes.
26, 28, 53, 51? Yes, I do. Johnston County is the fastest growing county in the state of North Carolina, averaging over 300 new residents a month. I do not know, with a lot of that influx coming into District 26, I do not know the area well enough with the new population, with that many people coming into the county. So I would be concerned if I did not have a strong incumbent, did not have a strong candidate. 26, I would be concerned. 53 and 51. I've lost 51 before. That has flipped back and forth. So an incumbent matters there. And Representative Lewis has been in 53 for a number of years. An open seat would definitely be something I would focus on there.
Okay. Focusing on your county grouping and the city of Goldsboro, could you point out where the city of Goldsboro is in the map?
Yes.
Okay.
If you made it bigger, I could tell you.
Sure, pardon me.
If you look in the northeastern part of House District 21, predominantly in the blue area, that whole area there, but Goldsboro expands out due to annexation. It spreads out pretty large.
Okay. And is it your understanding that the city of Goldsboro is split in your county grouping?
I do have portions of the actual city itself in House District 10.
And tell me, is there any benefit to a city to having more than one legislative member representing it?
Absolutely.
What is that benefit?
More voice, more votes. I would tell the court, this is a concern when we look at the urban-rural divide. After the last redistricting, we had 3 House members, 2 senators. Now I'm down 2 representatives and 1 senator. So our voice was, in a rural area, was cut in half. And that's what we're seeing throughout rural North Carolina, both in the east and in the west. So when it comes to local issues, I lose votes.
Let's move to a different county grouping, Representative Bell. We can turn, again, using plaintiff's own maps to illustrate this discussion, we can turn to Plaintiff's Exhibit 291 in the binder. Now, this map represents districts 4, 14, and 15 in Duplin and Onslow County. Could you tell the court about candidate quality and political issues in House Districts 4, 14, and 15?
Yes.
Okay. So I see in District 4, the Republican candidate was Jimmy Dixon, and the Democratic candidate was Daquan Love. Can you tell the court a bit about issues in that district?
Yes. Another social conservative area, very rural. This was actually ground zero for the nuisance lawsuits that dealt with our hog industry. Representative Jimmy Dixon is a farmer himself, very well-known football star in the community, extremely popular with both Republicans and Democrats. He was at the forefront of advocating for our farmers. His opposition was on socially liberal and in opposition to our farmers. And without Representative Dixon, that's a toss-up in my opinion. As long as Representative Dixon is there and the agriculture community is supportive of him, he has a very good chance of staying there.
And for those not aware of the hog nuisance lawsuit you described, what did that mean politically for this area?
By far the number one issue that affected every race in this district.
What was it?
As far as
Pardon me, what was the hog lawsuit?
was where we had out-of-state trial attorneys come in and team up with in-state trial attorneys and sue our farmers. It would have crippled our agriculture industry. It would have destroyed our way of life. It would have been over.
Thank you. And now moving on to District 14, I see that the Republican candidate was George Cleveland and the Democratic candidate was Ike Johnson. Could you tell the court about issues in District 14?
Yes.
Please do.
District 14 is in Onslow County. That is a very conservative area. Also in Onslow County, you have Camp Lejeune. So you have a huge military presence with a lot of retired military as well. Representative Cleveland is a longtime serving member of the General Assembly. He's also a retired Marine and very active and respected in the community. This was a district that I was concerned about because the Democrat Party did an outstanding job of recruiting a candidate that was also a retired Marine, very conservative, and since Representative Cleveland had come out of a tough primary, we were concerned. So this is an issue that even though in a very conservative area, this is a district that we watched and tried to help as much as we could.
And the incumbent won?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And on the map, do you see in the middle of districts 14 and 15, right above the word Onslow, there's a blue shape above the word Onslow. Would moving this bit into District 14 make District 14 a Democratic-leaning district?
Objection calls for speculation and I think expert input that's without foundation.
I can ask a few foundation questions. Okay. Representative Bell, are you familiar with the geographic area between Districts 14 and 15?
Yes.
Okay. And are you familiar with voting behavior in those districts?
I would have to go look at data, but this is a very conservative area. Very few Democrats elected. This is a really conservative area.
Okay. Representative Bell, I'd like to ask you about District 15. And in 2018, the candidates in that election were Philip Shepard for the Republican candidate and Dan Whitten as the Democratic candidate. Could you describe for the court some of the candidate quality and political issues at play in that district in 2018?
Yes.
Please do.
Thank you. This is another social conservative area, as just like District 14, District 15 has a huge military and veteran presence. Representative Phil Shepard is I believe he's retired civil service from Camp Lejeune. He's also a very popular minister in the area. This area is a social conservative area that pitted a very liberal candidate versus a very conservative candidate.
Would you say that agricultural issues were an important factor in the 2018 election in this area?
Yes.
And if you had open seats in these districts, meaning Republicans did not have an incumbency advantage, do you have concerns about the Republican Party winning all these districts?
It would depend on the candidate.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that Democratic voters are concentrated in urban areas of the state?
Yes, we do.
Let's turn now to Plaintiff's Exhibit 293. Again, this is a map provided by plaintiffs. This depicts House District 7 and 25. Could you talk to the court a little bit about candidate quality and political issues at play in these districts in 2018?
Yes.
Please do.
In District 7 in Franklin County, the Democrat was an incumbent and popular. She was very well respected in the House. We did have a primary in that seat, a Republican primary. The current House member, Representative Lisa Barnes, won that primary and went on to win the general election. She is was a very popular county commissioner. She's also, her and her family are big sweet potato farmers in the area, so she had a tremendous amount of name ID. A lot of folks knew who she was, especially with their company and also with her serving publicly. In District 25, this was an interesting seat. This was an open seat. This is one that we felt like that we recruited the right candidate for. It was a minister versus a minister, both popular ministers in the area. I've never seen a candidate work as hard as our candidate did. I think he knocked on more doors than anybody I've ever seen. And we just came up short of that one. But that's one that I felt like that we had definitely an opportunity in.
And if House District 7 became an open seat, meaning the Republican Party lost the incumbency advantage, do you have concerns about the Republican Party winning HD 7?
Yes.
Okay, let's turn to Plaintiff's Exhibit 294. And again, using plaintiff's map to illustrate this discussion, this map focuses on House Districts 8, 9, and 12. Could you tell the court about candidate quality and political issues in these districts?
Yes.
And starting with District 8, I believe the Republican candidate was Brenda Smith, and the Democratic candidate was Candy Smith.
This was a new district, I believe, that was drawn after the redistricting. We recruited a candidate there. The Democrat candidate was former mayor, longtime city council person, very outspoken, very engaged in the community. They had a dynamic candidate there. Mm-hmm. District 9, this is in both these districts, actually all three, you have to take into effect East Carolina University and also the medical community. District 9, the incumbent there is a very popular doctor and neurologist in the community. He's currently running for Congress. So so the medical community really got behind a doctor. He's the only medical doctor that we have in the house, so that was a big push there. And then in district, and also is a more socially conservative area, and the Democrat candidate there was, I believe, still in school at ECU and socially liberal. In District 12, you move back into the agriculture community in the hog nuisance area. If you look at the map, Wayne, Green, Lenore, Duplin, Pender, that whole area there would have been really affected. The agriculture issues were the number one issue in that area. In District 12, there was a Democrat incumbent that served in the House for 3 terms. We were able to recruit a former county commissioner, city council member in LaGrange, and popular business owner, and we were able to recruit him. He did unseat the opponent, and frankly what helped us there is that the incumbent had some legal issues, a number of legal issues that were brought forward, and this was also an area that was devastated by Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence, and the incumbent was not active in the disaster recovery part of this area. So the agriculture and disaster recovery and the incumbent's legal issues played a huge role in this race.
So here, was the candidate more important to the outcome than the map?
Yes.
Okay. And now, if House Districts 9 or 12 became open seats, meaning the Republican Party lost its incumbency advantage, do you have concern about Republicans winning those districts?
Repeat the district again, I'm sorry.
Sure. Districts 9 or 12, if those became open seats and the Republican Party lost its incumbency advantage,
Yes, I do.
Okay. Let's turn to Plaintiff's Exhibit 301, please. Now again, this is plaintiff's own map depicting districts 16, 46, and 47, which include Pender, Columbus, and Robeson counties. Now, can you tell the court about candidate quality and political issues at play in these districts? And I'll start by saying it looks like House District 16, the Republican candidate was Carson Smith, and the Democratic candidate was John Johnson.
Yes.
Okay. And could you talk to the court a little bit about candidate quality and political issues in District 16?
In District 16, another social conservative area, rural area, agriculture played a large portion in these districts. We also were able to recruit a longtime county sheriff that retired. So you had a county sheriff who was also highway patrol, extremely popular. It was a great candidate and a great opportunity for us. I actually questioned why he would give up a vehicle and a gun to come to Raleigh, but he did, and we were glad to have him as a candidate there, and he did very well there. It was extremely popular. When you move into District 46,
And I think, in District 46, you had the Republican candidate of Brenda Jones and the Democratic candidate of Barbara Yates Lockamy. Could you tell the court about issues there?
yes. This area also was devastated by Hurricane Matthew and Florence. Representative Brendan Jones, even before he was elected, was very active in the recovery effort here. He actually ran before and lost, and then ran in an open seat and won. He's a great candidate, very hardworking with constituent service. He has got total support from the community. He's just a great candidate, and he led. He actually evacuated towns during the disaster. I mean, that's how active he is in the community.
And now moving on to District 47, where the Republican candidate was Jared Lowry and the Democratic candidate was Charles Graham.
Representative Graham does a good job representing his community. He's active in his community. He was also active in disaster recovery. We felt that we had recruited a really good opponent somebody that was really engaged in the Lumbee community, was active in the community, and we felt we had an opportunity to win here. We just could not perform.
Okay. You thought you had a shot, though?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if House District 16 or 46 became open seats, meaning the Republican Party lost the incumbency advantage, do you have concern about Republicans winning these districts?
Yes.
Okay. Finally, let's turn to Plaintiff's Exhibit 326. Now, using plaintiff's map to illustrate House Districts 114, 115, and 116 in Buncombe County, could you tell the court about candidate quality and political issues at play in the 2018 election there?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
District 15, that's a rural area, but you're looking at the very progressive city of Asheville moving into that area. You have a representative that fits the profile there. He really resembles his community, works hard in the community. We didn't have a great candidate there, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
When you go into District 114, that's just a very progressive area, socially liberal. And that's Asheville, the city of Asheville itself. I don't know if they have a Republican in their district in the city. It's just a very progressive area. When you move into District 116, we recruited a very good candidate that worked extremely hard, and she was up against the incumbent. That's a more socially conservative area. The Representative Brian Turner is in that district. He is very well known. His family is very well known. He works with us. As I said, as long as he's there, that's going to be a tough seat to overturn.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Let's move on, Representative Bell. I'd like to talk with you about the process of redistricting. And I'd like to start by asking you about a recent redistricting bill on which you were a primary sponsor. For the record, that's HB 1017. Did this bill relate to redrawing House districts in Wake County pursuant to a court order?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And did you work with Democrats to pass this bill?
Yes.
And what is your recollection of the percentage of Democrats who voted for this bill?
I believe, I have to go back and look at the vote count, but I believe all Democrats supported the bill. Once again, this was a redistricting issue that I tried to stay away from and ended up finding myself as a primary sponsor. So I was not as engaged in the process.
So redistricting can be a bipartisan effort sometimes.
Yes, this was actually very smooth and non-controversial.
Do you think that the House plan that was enacted is a 1 in a billion best Republican gerrymander of the House?
Objection, Your Honor. It calls for expert opinion, certainly counting things in the billions, as we've seen. I think the sword shield doctrine also is going to preclude that.
Okay. And now, plaintiffs' experts have opined that redistricting in North Carolina in 2017 was simply an effort to maximize Republican seat numbers. Do you agree?
Objections. Same objections. It calls for explicitly for an expert opinion, and it's also barred by the sword shield doctrine.
Sustain.
Representative Bell, what would happen if you tried to maximize Republican seat numbers in drawing a House plan?
If you try to maximize to the extent, you would actually lose Republicans.
And why is that?
Just everything would be diluted, and people show up to vote. They vote for candidates. They vote for who's on the ballot. You would dilute it.
And as majority leader in the House, do you believe you could get majority Republican support for a plan that maximized Republican seat numbers?
Objection. Commentary on what sorts of plans may maximize Republican seat numbers, again, it goes into the same questions about expert input, as well as intent in achieving that.
Your Honors, it's not getting into intent. This gentleman is the head of the majority. He's the majority leader in the House, and I'm asking him about how many seats he believes Republicans could get, whether it could be maximized, whether he could garner votes for that. That is squarely within his knowledge and understanding. If we step back and focus on Rule 701, it's within his perception, and it's about a fact at issue in this case. Again, I have not asked about his intent. I'm asking about whether he believes he could garner support.
We'll allow the question. Go ahead.
Representative Bell, if you drew a plan in order to maximize Republican seats, do you believe you could get your fellow Republican members to support that plan?
First, I would not draw a map. Don't like the redistricting process. It's very time-consuming, and I have a 4-year-old. But it would be very controversial and hard to get support in our caucus.
And why is that?
You would decimate our caucus.
Now, stepping back, on matters that you vote on as a member in the legislature, how often do Republicans and Democrats vote together?
Frequently, I could give you an idea of a percentage.
Yes, that would be.
80+%. A lot of the bills that come through the General Assembly are strongly bipartisan.
So it sounds as though you would disagree on some issues, but it's a small portion compared to that 80+%. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. In your experience, does the media focus on the 80% on which parties agree, or on the roughly 20% of disagreement?
The 20% is what sells newspapers and makes headlines and adds clicks.
And finally, understanding that you are the House Majority Leader, if the Democratic presidential candidate carries North Carolina in 2020, could Democrats take the majority of the House?
Objection. Again, it calls for an expert analysis. I don't believe there's a foundation laid.
Your Honor, this line of questioning is related to an earlier line of questioning where plaintiff's counsel lodged the same objection and you overruled it. We are talking with this representative as a member, as the House Majority Leader, about how he sees elections and different elections affecting the makeup of his House. And I'm specifically focused on whether his position as Majority Leader is at risk. That is squarely within his perception, and it's a fact at issue before the court.
We'll allow his lay opinion on this question.
Would you like me to repeat the question,
Can you repeat
Representative?
the question, please?
Understanding that you are the House Majority Leader, if the Democratic presidential candidate carries North Carolina in 2020, Could Democrats take the majority of the House?
Yes, in my earlier testimony, actually showed them the path to do that. Showed the pathway to do that.
So are you worried that Republicans could lose the majority?
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Bell. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination by the plaintiffs. Jones.
Good morning, Representative Bell. I'm Stanton Jones. I represent the plaintiffs in this case. You did not participate in drawing the House or Senate plans that were enacted by the General Assembly in 2011. You didn't participate in creating those?
I was not there in 2011.
Okay. You were elected to the General Assembly for the first time in 2012?
Correct.
Okay. And you also, I believe you testified to this on your direct examination, but you didn't participate in drawing or crafting the 2017 House or Senate plans either, did you?
No, sir, I tried really hard to stay away from redistricting.
Okay. So any testimony that you've given about any of the districts or the district boundaries, it's not based on any participation that you had or any knowledge that you have about the actual map-making process from back then?
As far as the map-making process, no.
Okay. You identified a number of districts that you say could be competitive, as you're using the term, for Democrats in 2020 in the North Carolina House of Representatives. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. For a number of those districts, you said that they will be competitive if there's an open seat. Have all the Republican incumbents in those districts announced that they are retiring or not running again in 2020?
If I recall, when I went through the list, I actually listed what I felt would be competitive seats. Some of those are actually currently held by Democrats, some are held by Republicans. There's a number of factors that will go in on why they're competitive. We do have a number of members that have said they would like to not seek re-election or retire, and we're already seeing some of that happen with the resignations of some of our members.
So for the districts you identified today that you say will be competitive if there's an open seat in 2020, are you saying that for the ones that have Republican incumbents today, are you saying that those Republican incumbents are not going to run again in 2020?
I was asked to identify the competitive seats. Identify competitive seats. If you're talking about a particular district, I'm more than happy to explain to you why I think they're competitive. I would also say that due to my position in the House, I do have some legislative confidentiality on what members will and will not do, and I would not like to reveal that due to their privacy.
So I'm asking you a different question. Okay, the Legislative Defendants Council asked you some questions. I'm asking you a new question now, and I'd like to focus on that one if we could. My question is, for the districts you identified during your direct testimony that you say would be competitive for Democrats in 2020 if the seat is open, where those seats are currently held by Republican members, are you saying that all of those Republican members are not going to run again in 2020?
I'm not saying they're not running again in 2020.
Okay. One of the districts that you said would be competitive if there's an open seat was House District 53. That's Representative David Lewis's district, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Is Representative Lewis retiring between now and 2020?
Your Honor, I would just like to note that the representative has already noted a concern about confidentiality here, and these questions have been asked and answered, but more importantly, there are issues of confidentiality that I'd ask the council to respect.
I think the direct testimony opened the door all the way. He testified on direct examination that he believes the district will be competitive if there's an open seat. We should be entitled to ask whether he has any view as to whether there will be an open seat.
He's not asking about view, he's asking about, he's directly targeting information that the representative has that is confidential. And we'd ask that the council respect that line of confidentiality. If there is no incumbent is a different question than, is this incumbent running again?
Just quickly, I think it would be unfair to allow him to testify that this is going to be a competitive district if it's an open seat, but not allow us to ask what he knows about whether it's going to be an open seat.
Well, this is a difficult question because I do want to respect confidential communications that may have been made regarding individuals' plans of running or not running. And might I suggest it be done more globally rather than looking at individual districts? You started with the proposition that do all of these districts, are you aware that incumbents are not running? Perhaps you could narrow it down and say, well, looking at the individual districts that you're interested in, what percentage of them are you aware that there may be some question about an incumbent running rather than going district by district? And I'd say we start there, and then perhaps that would not lead to an objection if he could look more anonymously at the group of districts.
I'll make it even easier for you. I'll just move on.
All right.
So I'd like to go through and talk about some of the specific districts that you said you think could be competitive in 2020. And let's start with district number you'll bear with me here. We've pulled together some information about these districts, and I'm going to try to present it to you. So let's start with District 4. Can we pull up Legislative Defendants Exhibit 48? And it's in the exhibit binders there. This is the printout from the State Board of Elections website with the 2018 House election results. And if you go to the second page, at the very top, you can see the 2018 results for District 4. Are you there with me, Representative Bell? So the Republican candidate, Jimmy Dixon, won this seat in 2018. Well, first of all, let me ask you this. 2018 on the whole in the North Carolina House elections was a pretty good year for Democrats, wouldn't you say?
Yes, we lost seats.
Okay. The Republicans lost seats.
Correct.
Democrats picked up seats.
Correct.
Democrats had strong fundraising.
Correct.
Democrats fielded a lot of candidates, I believe, in every district.
To my knowledge, Democrats fielded all 120.
Would you say that the national environment, which is something that you testified about as a factor on your direct examination, the national environment tended to favor Democrats in 2018?
I would say that, but also the Democrats did a really good job of getting out and really trying to recruit candidates.
So on the whole, good year for Democrats across the state and the House.
Not as good for us.
So in 2018, in this really good Democratic year, in House District 4, the Republican candidate won with, if you look at that chart right there, nearly 63% of the vote. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Let's take a look at how. Okay, can we pull up now? I'd like to take a look at how this district performed under a couple of other recent election results, if we could. Can I pull up plaintiffs' exhibit 591? Can we flip to page 4? So Representative Bell, I'll tell you, this is the stat pack from the General Assembly for the 2017 House plan. Is this a document or a type of document that you're familiar with generally?
No, not really.
Okay. Well, are you aware that the General Assembly produces a stat pack with basic information about House and Senate districts that have been enacted into law in North Carolina?
I've seen statistics in our redistricting hearings that were attached to maps. So.
Okay, so I'll just tell you that this document just calculates how districts would have performed, how the House districts enacted in 2017 would have performed under various recent elections. Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, so if you look at page 4, and if you scroll, page 3, sorry, and if you take a look at, can we blow up District 4? This is how District 4 performed in the 2012 presidential race, which was Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Remember that one, yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That year, District 4 went for Romney with over 60% of the vote. You see that? Do you see that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now we've got, in 2018, the Republican candidate won this seat with over 62%, almost 63% of the vote. This district was a Romney district in 2012 with over 60% of the vote. Sticking on page 3, can you go to page 10? If we can go to page 10 and blow up District 4 again, page 9. Page 9. This is going to show how District 4 performed under the 2016 presidential election results, and that one was Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton. You recall that one?
Yes.
Okay. If you look at that one, District 4 under the 2016 presidential results went for Donald Trump, the Republican, with over 63% of the vote. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And let's do one more, sticking on the same page. Let's see how District 4 performed using the 2016 gubernatorial election results, and that was Cooper against McCrory, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if we can blow up District 4 on the piece of the chart showing the 2016 gubernatorial results, am I right that McCrory would have won this district with 63.67% of the vote?
Yes.
Okay. So just to tie it all together, this is a District 4 is a district that in 2018, the Republican candidate actually won with very close to 63% of the vote to less than 35%. That under the 2012 presidential results, Mitt Romney carried this district with over 60% of the vote to less than 39%. In 2016 presidential, Donald Trump would have carried this district with over 63% of the vote to less than 35% for Hillary Clinton. And in the 2016 gubernatorial, McCrory carried this district with upwards of 64% of the vote, again to Cooper's less than 35%. You think this is a competitive district for Democrats in 2020?
It could be.
Okay.
I'm happy to explain.
Nope, please don't. You can do it on redirect if they ask you. Let's take a look at district number 14. In district number 14, let's go back to legislative defendants' Exhibit 48. And this would be on page 3. Yep. Okay. This is a District 14 that went for the Republican candidate George Cleveland in 2018. He had just about 59% of the vote to about 41 for the Democrat. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And can we pull up again Plaintiff's Exhibit 591? And go to page 3. And if you look at District 14, according to the 2012 presidential results, this is a district that went for Romney with about 59% of the vote to less than 40% of the vote for President Obama, who was then incumbent president of the United States. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And if we can go to page 9, take a look at District 14. In the 2016 presidential election results, this is a district that performed for Donald Trump with 60.55% of the vote compared to less than 35 for Hillary Clinton. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if you look at how this district performed according to the 2016 gubernatorial, this was a Republican leaning district for McCrory with over 61% of the vote compared to 35.73 for Cooper, the Democrat. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so in real life in 2018, the Republican wins District 14 with 59% of the vote. It performed in 2012 presidential with Romney winning 59%. In 2016, Trump winning over 60%. In the gubernatorial 2016, McCrory, the Republican, winning more than 61%. Do you think this is a district that's going to be competitive for Democrats in 2020?
It could be, and I'm happy to explain.
You can do it later.
Your Honor, I'd ask that he be allowed to answer the question.
We'll allow it on redirect. You'll have the opportunity to explore that if you wish.
Would you agree with me that in 2012, President Obama, as incumbent president of the United States, was a good candidate?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that Governor Cooper in 2016 was a good candidate?
No.
He won, right?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
But there's a difference in a good candidate and not. I didn't think Governor McCrory was a good candidate either.
Okay. I'd like to go through a few more, and we could go through and pull up the charts to look at them, but it's fairly slow. Would you accept if I just represent to you what the charts would show if I pulled them up, and you can just take my word for it?
Objection, Your Honor. I'd rather let the record speak for itself and not rely on counsel's representations of what it reads.
That's fine. We'll pull them up if that's what they prefer. Okay, District 26, House District 26. If you go back to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 48, this is going to be on page 4 at the bottom. This is another district that the Republican, Donna White, won with 60% of the vote to just 40 for the Democratic candidate, right?
Yes.
Okay, now let's go to Plaintiff's Exhibit 591. If you go to page 3, District 26, under the 2012 presidential results, performed for Romney with over nearly 62% of the vote compared to under 37 for President Obama, then the incumbent president of the United States. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to page 9. District 26 performed in the 2016 presidential election with Trump, the Republican, winning 60% of the vote compared to under 36% for the Democratic candidate. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. In the 2016 gubernatorial race, District 26 performed with 58.63% of the vote going to the Republican candidate, with less than 40% to the Democratic candidate. Do you see that?
Yes.
You also think that this is going to be a competitive district for Democrats in 2020?
District 26? Yes, I do.
Okay. Okay, let's take a look at District 53. Let's go back to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 48. House District 53 is going to show up on page 8 of that document, right in the middle. Oh, this is Representative Lewis's district, right?
Yes.
Okay. Representative Lewis, he's been in the House for a while, right?
Yes.
Long time incumbent.
Yes.
He won this district in 2018 with 63% of the vote. Is that right?
If you round up, yes.
Yeah, I'm rounding up from 62.99 to 63. You with me?
Yes.
Okay. And the Democrat won 37% of the vote, if you round down?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see how it performed under some of these other results. So go to Plaintiff's Exhibit 591. If we go to page 3, District 53 performed in the 2012 presidential election with Mitt Romney winning by nearly 60%. You round up a couple tenths. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And President Obama, he had less than 40% of the vote in District 53 under the 2012 presidential results, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to page 9 of this document. District 53 in the 2016 presidential race performed with Donald Trump carrying this district by nearly 61% of the vote compared to less than 36% of the vote for the Democratic candidate. You see that?
Yes.
That's a pretty wide margin as far as elections go, wouldn't you say? 61 to 36.
Yes.
So it is a wide margin.
Yes.
That's not a competitive race.
If you're basing it off numbers, you're looking at numbers, but you have to look at people, you have to look at issues, you have to look at the mood, you have to look at incumbency, you have to look at what's going on. Just because what you're pulling statistics and then you're pulling actual number data, but if I've got a great candidate in that seat, I can win it and maintain it. If I have a horrible candidate in that seat, then we have problems.
You said Barack Obama was a good candidate in 2012, right?
Yes.
He got 40% compared to 60% for Mitt Romney, right? We already looked at that.
Correct. And if you would go back and look at history of North Carolina on the federal and state levels, North Carolina always tends to fall in the red category Republican. I believe Ronald Reagan carried. I don't have any data from him. I believe Ronald Reagan carried. I believe George Bush carried. You move into Barack Obama lost the first race here. Won the first race, lost the second race. The difference in the areas you're showing about President Trump are actually really unique because those are the first time that a presidential candidate has actually stepped foot in rural North Carolina. All the districts you're talking about, President Trump physically had a presence in those counties. It makes a huge difference. But your presidential in North Carolina normally leans Republican. Your U.S. Senate races, give or take, lean Republican. Your congressional races lean Republican, and your state races traditionally lean Republican, especially in rural areas. Now, when you get further down the ballot, you have to look in, and I'm happy to explain on others why I think they're competitive, because you do have Democrat elected officials that have actually run countywide and won in these seats, but yet you also have a Republican House member.
Oh, so Mitt Romney, he never came to rural North Carolina?
Mitt Romney, as far as I know, never stepped foot in Kenansville, North Carolina. President Trump did.
So, but Mitt Romney still carried this district, District 53, with 60% of the vote, just about the same as Trump.
Because they traditionally lean Republican on presidential elections.
And if you look at the 2016 gubernatorial for this district, the district about the same as the presidential, 60% for the Republican candidate compared to under 38% for the Democratic candidate. Do you see that on Plaintiff's Exhibit 591?
In which district?
District 53.
In District 53?
Yeah, we'll pull it up. See that this is District 53 under the 2016 gubernatorial, over 60% for the Republican candidate compared to under 38% for the Democratic candidate. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And this is another one that you, as you testified, you believe that this is going to be a competitive seat for Democrats in 2020?
It could be, yes.
Okay, let's do one more. Let's take a look at House District 108, if we can go back to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 48. This is going to be on page 15, right in the middle. The Republican candidate, John Torbett, won this district with about 60% of the vote, compared to just a hair over 40% for the Democrat. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now if we could go to Plaintiff's Exhibit 591 and flip to page 3, 4, page 4, page 5. We're going to go one at a time till we get there. District 108, under the 2012 presidential results, that's one that Mitt Romney, the Republican candidate, had with 60.5% compared to just under 38.5% for then President Barack Obama, the Democratic candidate. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and if we go forward to page 11, we can look at how District 108 performed in the 2016 presidential. Looks like President Trump would have carried District 108 with 62% of the vote compared to just over 34% for Hillary Clinton. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, and Governor, if we go to the gubernatorial results, this will be the last one. This is one again where the Republican candidate would have had over 60% of the vote compared to about 37% for the Democratic candidate. You see that?
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, and this is another one that you believe is going to be, in your view, a competitive district for Democrats in the 2020 cycle.
It could be, yes.
Okay. So, switching gears, you testified earlier that one of the things you do is provide, in your role as a member of the North Carolina House of Representatives, is to provide constituent services to your constituents in your district, right?
Yes.
And you try to help them with various issues that they may be having that they bring to you or to your legislative office?
Correct.
Okay. Another thing that you do as a member of the North Carolina House of Representatives is to participate in enacting the laws of this state, right?
As far as making them, yes.
Okay. In providing constituent services, I believe you testified that you provide those services to both Republican voters and Democratic voters in your district alike. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So in providing constituent services, you and your legislative office do not discriminate against voters on the basis of either their political beliefs or their party affiliation or the way that they've voted in the past, do you?
I do not know.
Okay. you don't identify heavily Democratic pockets or regions within your district and provide some sort of lesser constituent services to those areas, do you?
I try to serve my district to the best of my ability, and if folks outside the district need help, I do what I can to serve.
And you,
the people are my boss.
and you serve all the folks in your district, across your district, equally, right?
Yes, sir.
And do you believe that all members of the North Carolina House of Representatives do the same and should do the same?
I would hope they do, yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the North Carolina General Assembly, in enacting the laws of this state, also should not discriminate against the people on the basis of their political beliefs, their party affiliation, or the way that they voted in prior elections?
We try to do our best to do business with the state of North Carolina to the best of our ability.
I'm not sure that you've answered my question. I think my question is just a little bit different. I'll state it again. Would you agree with me that the North Carolina General Assembly, in enacting the laws of this state, the laws under which all the people need to live, should not discriminate against the people on the basis of their political beliefs, their party affiliation, or the way that they voted for candidates in prior elections?
Your Honor, we would lodge an objection. First, it's been asked and answered. Second, to the extent he's drilling down on this idea of discrimination, that is calling for a legal conclusion.
Overruled. You may answer.
You
want me to ask it again?
We try not to discriminate against anybody, period. I can't speak for 119 other members of the House, but I do my best to serve the public.
So it's a little closer, but my question again is different. So I'll restate it. My question is, would you agree with me that the North Carolina General Assembly, in enacting the laws of this state, should not discriminate against the people on the basis of their political beliefs, their party affiliation, or the way that they voted for Republican or Democratic candidates in prior elections?
It's my belief I've answered your question.
I don't believe you have, so I'll ask it again. I don't think you've told me whether
Then I
you...
believe we just agree to disagree, but I believe I've answered your question.
Okay, I'll try it one more time.
Your Honors, I don't know if this is necessary. At this point, it's been asked multiple times. The witness has answered and said he's answered the question.
Your Honors, he hasn't answered the question.
I think we'll allow it to be asked one more time. The last response is we try not to discriminate against anyone, period. And there's should in Mr. Jones's question, and so you can ask it one more time.
All right, I'll ask it one more time. Would you agree with me, Representative Bell, that the North Carolina General Assembly, in enacting the laws of this state, the laws that govern people's lives, should not discriminate against the people on the basis of their political beliefs, their party affiliation, or the way that they have voted for Republican or Democratic candidates in prior elections?
We do not discriminate.
One moment, Mr. Knight, let me check with the other defendants. For the intervening defendants, any cross-examination of this witness?
No, Your Honor.
And for the state?
No, Your Honor.
Ms. McKnight, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Representative Bell, I heard plaintiffs' counsel ask you a series of questions about whether certain districts will be competitive in 2020 based on past election results from presidential races. Let me start by asking you, are past election results for presidential elections the best predictor of future success in legislative races?
I'll object. I think that also calls for an expert analysis. I don't believe there's been a foundation laid that this witness could answer that question one way or another.
To the extent it explains his understanding of the questions that were asked previously, we're going to allow the lay opinion as to predictors of future election results based on past presidential elections.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Is it the best? No.
Okay. And is it the only predictor of future success in legislative races?
No.
Okay. And I heard plaintiff's counsel ask you some questions based on past election results for gubernatorial races. I have the same question for you there. Are past election results for gubernatorial elections the best predictor of future success in legislative races?
No.
Let's focus on the districts he asked you about and you did not have an opportunity to provide your explanation. Let's start with House District 4. Now, I heard plaintiff's counsel ask you if you believed House District 4 could be competitive in 2020 considering these past election results. Could you explain why you believe House District 4 could be a competitive race in 2020?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
House District 4, the incumbent is Representative Jimmy Dixon. Representative Dixon is our senior chair of agriculture. This was ground zero for the agriculture industry, but also the hog nuisance lawsuit. You had an incumbent that was enthusiastically involved in the advocating for our farmers. You had a candidate that was not known to the area on the Democrat side, was not a native in the area as far as I know, and was in opposition to our farmers. If that becomes an open seat, and we end up with someone hostile to our farmers on the Republican side and somebody proactive on the Democrat side, that could become. You also at the same time had a very popular Democrat sheriff run in this election and won. So you had a mixed bag. Also, the enthusiasm in this district, the enthusiasm was based all around the hog nuisance lawsuits. And that's where the majority of support for Representative Dixon came out of. Okay. You can still go today in the district and see the support farmer signs. They're still all over the area.
Thank you, Representative. Now, moving on to HD 14, I heard plaintiff's counsel ask you about past election results for presidential races in HD 14. Can you explain why you believe HD 14 could be competitive in the 2020 election?
Also going throughout our country, there's also a sentiment towards incumbents. When you talk about drain the swamp, anti-incumbent type, that does cause me concern. Here you have a long-time incumbent who had some personal issues, the loss of a wife, and preventing him from working as hard as he normally would have. They recruited an outstanding retired African-American gentleman that was a veteran, and he worked really hard. This is a district that if Representative Cleveland is not the incumbent and Mr. Johnson runs again, I hope we're able to recruit a really good candidate there.
Okay. And moving on to HD 26, I heard plaintiff's counsel ask you about HD 26. Can you explain why you believe HD 26 could be competitive in the 2020 election?
House District 26 is the bleed over from Wake County. This is part of the county that's growing extremely fast. Remember, Johnston County is the fastest growing county in the state. whatever 300 new residents a month. School-age children is increasing there. Even though Johnston County is a traditional Republican stronghold with longtime representatives such as Leo Daughtry and J.H. Langdon, I don't know who's moved into this district, and with so many people moving into the district and the Wake County bleed over, it could be very competitive.
Thank you, Representative. I'd like to turn now to HD 53. I heard plaintiff's counsel ask you about HD 53. Can you explain why you believe HD 53 could be competitive in 2020?
To do the same as others, Representative Lewis has been a long time incumbent. It depends on local issues. You've got a growing university there in Campbell. You've got people moving into the area or leaving Wake County and moving in. If that's an open seat, without Representative Lewis has been there for so long, we don't know what that district will look like, especially with the neighboring counties being competitive.
Thank you.
I'm
And
going to
now,
move to strike the testimony, Your Honor. I was not allowed to ask questions on the basis of an invocation of privilege about whether there would be an open seat. I think it's unfair for him to get up on redirect and again repeat this inquiry about whether there may be an open seat.
Your Honor, this is a fair line of inquiry. This is consistent with what he testified on direct. Plaintiff's counsel was allowed to ask about whether he thought this would be competitive in 2020. Plaintiff's counsel was able to ask about whether the incumbent would be running again if that had an effect. What plaintiff's counsel was not allowed to ask about was whether specifically Representative Lewis had plans that Representative Bell is aware of about running again or not running again.
I think we understand your question, and I think that it's permissible. I assume you're phrasing it as a hypothetical, since there's no evidence before the court that Representative Lewis is not intending to run again.
That is correct, Your Honor, and to be clear, I am not interested in any confidential information you may have or not have. This is the hypothetical that we've all been operating under.
All right. So on that understanding, you can ask about the value of incumbency and things of that sort.
Thank you, Your Honors. You may go ahead, Representative Bell.
In this district, you've got a longtime candidate, successful business owner, very active in the community, very active in the agriculture community. That is what that district is.
Thank you. And now moving on to HD 108. I heard plaintiff's counsel ask you questions about whether you believed that District 108 could be competitive in 2020 based on past presidential election results. Could you explain why you believe District HD 108 could be competitive in 2020?
Yes.
Please
This
do.
area is a growing area, similar to the District 26 in Johnston County. You have a lot of folks leaving Mecklenburg County, the Charlotte area, moving out into the suburbs. That growth is leaking in towards this area. Also, Representative Torbett, who's in that area, is our senior transportation chair and has been very active in the community with transportation issues. I-77 toll and those type of issues are major issues in that area with congestion and infrastructure needs, and with the movement leaving Mecklenburg County into the more suburban areas, that's a cause of concern for me.
And finally, Representative Bell, do you believe that the 2017 enacted plan discriminates against voters in North Carolina?
No, we do our best not to discriminate at all.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you. You may step down, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
further evidence for the defense?
Yes, good afternoon, Your Honors. Patrick Lewis from Baker Hostetler on behalf of Legislative Defendants. We would like to call Dr. Douglas Johnson to the stand.
Please remain standing. Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your full name for the record? Oh, sorry.
You ready? Okay.
You're good?
Mr. Lewis, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name for the record?
Douglas Mark Johnson.
Thank you. All right. And we're going to be handing around a notebook of exhibits for your testimony today. So we'll just give one moment here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Johnson, I'd like for you to turn to the first tab in your binder, which is Legislative Defendants Exhibit 288.
I'm there.
And is this your curriculum vitae?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe for the court your educational background?
Sure. I have a bachelor's in government, which was our school's name for political science, from Claremont McKenna College, an MBA from the Anderson School at UCLA, and a PhD in political science from Claremont Graduate University.
And Dr. Johnson, what was the focus of your graduate studies in political science at Claremont Graduate University?
Primarily American politics, and I wrote my dissertation on redistricting.
And have you done any other academic work in the field of political demography or redistricting?
Yes, I'm a fellow at the Rose Institute of State and Local Government at Claremont McKenna College, and in that role I lead the Institute's research into the census and into redistricting related issues.
Okay. And what is the Rose Institute of State and Local Government?
It's actually, Claremont's, when we started, we were fairly unique in that it's actually a part of the college. So it's a research institute. It has a professor who's a director. We have students who are staff. And since 1973, we've been doing research on redistricting, both studies, all of studies, publications, and public education efforts.
And have you been involved in research and redistricting while at the Rose Institute?
Yes, I've supervised a lot of student research and authored a number of reports. I've been interviewed hundreds of times, written op-eds. We've gotten coverage on everything from the Washington Post to the LA Times and everything in between, and plus a lot of television news from across the spectrum has come and featured our work as well.
And do you teach on redistricting issues?
Not as a formal professor, but often I will, classes will come to the Institute, professors will bring their classes and I'll talk about redistricting, and I'm in charge of training the roughly 35 students who work at the Institute on redistricting related issues, census issues, and geographic information systems.
And besides the Rose Institute, where else are you currently employed?
I'm the president of National Demographics Corporation.
And how long have you had a role with National Demographics Corporation?
I did a little work as an undergrad for them. The company was started by two of my professors. But I came to NDC full-time starting in 2001, and I've been there ever since.
And is the National Demographics Corporation, is that your full-time employment? Is National Demographics Corporation your full-time employment?
Yes.
And what business is National Demographics Corporation engaged in?
Over the years, we've done a variety of types of related work, but now we're essentially full-time doing redistricting, districting work, and liability analysis related to districting issues and polarized voting studies.
For how long have you studied redistricting in a professional role?
Well, it kind of was hand in hand even when I was an undergrad, when I was working both for NDC and doing a little bit of independent consulting on redistricting back in the 1990 cycle, so 1990, 91. And then I came back to it in 2001, and it's been my primary work since 2001.
Have you spoken at any professional conferences on redistricting and related subjects?
All the time. So I've spoken to groups all across the country, from League of Women Voters, national conferences on redistricting reform, to California School Board Association meetings, to Arizona League of Cities and Towns, and then frequently at the National Conference of State Legislatures, where I talk to audiences of state legislators and staff about different elements of redistricting and the census.
What is the National Conference of State Legislatures?
It's funded by the state legislatures. It's a nonprofit centered, I think, out of Colorado, that organizes a couple of conferences a year on all kinds of issues facing the states at the time. But they have a dedicated kind of channel of research and panels and forums on the census and redistricting. And it's kind of the clearinghouse of where the experts in the field come to talk to the state legislators and discuss the latest developments and what's going on in the field of redistricting.
Dr. Johnson, in the course of your work, have you prepared proposed district maps to be considered for adoption by redistricting authorities?
Yes, hundreds of times.
Have you ever advised the legislature or other redistricting authority regarding the creation or evaluation of a districting plan?
Yes.
Would you say you do so frequently?
State legislators less frequently, but my full-time work is advising jurisdictions that are going through the districting and redistricting process.
Dr. Johnson, do you use, we've heard a lot in this case about a software called Maptitude. Dr. Johnson, do you use the Maptitude for redistricting software in connection with your work?
Yes, some 20 to 30 hours a week I'm on the software.
How long have you used Maptitude?
Since 2001, it's been my primary task, so anywhere from 20 to 30 hours a week for 18 years now.
Have you ever worked with Caliper, who I understand is the company that makes Maptitude, to provide feedback and suggestions for bug fixes or new features for the software?
Yes, frequently, and in fact, they just called me on Monday to ask about a feature they were thinking about adding to the software.
Dr. Johnson, have you ever served as an expert witness in redistricting litigation?
Yes, numerous times.
Have you ever been excluded as a witness by any court?
No.
A number of your cases, Dr. Johnson, have involved the California Voting Rights Act. Is that right?
Yes.
And those lawsuits have involved challenges to at-large elections for city council, school boards, counties, and so forth, correct?
Yes.
Approximately how many of those disputes have you been involved in?
Probably worked on 250 to 300 of those at this point.
And have you also served as an expert witness in challenges to state redistricting plans?
Yes.
In the course of your studies, have you ever studied redistricting issues pertinent to the state of North Carolina?
Yes, I think everyone that is professional and expert in this field is familiar with North Carolina's 1990s maps and the Shaw-Reno cases that came out of them. So we've definitely spent a lot of time on those. And then I also was an expert on the remedial stage of the federal Covington case.
And you were asked by the legislature, legislative defendants in this case, to apply your skills and experience and evaluate certain claims with respect to this litigation, correct?
Yes.
At this time, I think we'd like to move for the admission of Dr. Johnson as an expert in the fields of political science, political geography, redistricting, and the Maptitude for Redistricting software.
Any objection?
No objection.
No, Your Honor. This testimony will be received as proper.
Thank you, Your Honors. Now, Dr. Johnson, you authored a total of 3 reports in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'd just like to quickly go through them, and then we'll go into them in depth. First, I'd like for you to turn to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 287.
Yes.
And is this your initial report in this case?
Yes.
All right. And for purposes of this report, I'd like for you to turn to page 4 of your report. What questions, Dr. Johnson, were you asked to evaluate in connection with this report?
I was asked to look at the 2017 legislative maps and whether they maximize Republican political power in the legislature, and then to look at the state's county grouping rules and compare those to redistricting reform efforts in other states, and lastly to put those two together and see if the county grouping rule here in North Carolina acts as a significant restraint or limit on any abilities to maximize representation for one party in redistricting.
All right. And I'd like for you now to turn to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 289. And you recognize this as your supplemental report?
Yes.
All right, I'd like for you to turn to page 2 of the supplemental report. And can you identify for the court what questions you addressed in the context of this report?
Yes. I was asked to look at, as I describe it here, plaintiffs' alternative maps to see if they selectively employ allegedly nonpartisan criteria to achieve partisan goals. In that context, I was looking at the map proposed by Senator Jackson primarily. And then to also review the state's unusual nature of how it uses VTDs, voting districts or vote tabulation districts, in redistricting.
Okay. Then finally, I'd like for you to turn to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 290. You know when you get there?
Yes.
Okay. And you recognize this as a rebuttal report that you prepared in this case?
Yes.
All right. And I'd like for you now to turn to page 3 of that rebuttal report.
Okay.
All right. And in this particular rebuttal report, you're responding to certain claims made by Dr. Chen in his rebuttal expert report, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, before we get too far down the road, I did want to quickly review one item. Specifically, I'd like for you to turn to Legislative Defendants Exhibit 301, which is unfortunately in the very back of your binder.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Johnson, before your testimony today, is it fair to say that you noticed a calculation error in one portion of your rebuttal report?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that calculation error?
One of the side notes in the report is I compare the so-called Hoffler maps to the common cause maps. And for one of the maps, I had made a calculation error in the similarity index numbers I calculated.
Okay. And so you, Legislative Defense Exhibit 301, is that an errata that you prepared to correct the calculation error?
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, so I'd like to turn now back to get into the meat of your initial report. So we'll go back here to Legislative Exhibit 287.
Your Honor, if I may, very briefly, I just wanted the record to note that the errata that was just discussed was provided to us last night at about 7 p.m. We asked for the backup data, basically got radio silence for a couple hours, and it was provided around 11 p.m. So I just want the record to be clear on that.
Thank you. And on that point, we would like to just advise the court that the error was discovered yesterday, and that the errata was prepared on the same day and disclosed on the same day. Thank you. Dr. Johnson, I'd first like to talk, to just kind of orient the court to the county grouping rules and how those compare to redistricting reform in other states. Dr. Johnson, in the course of your professional work and studies, have you studied redistricting systems employed in states throughout the country?
Yes.
And have you also studied different efforts around the country to reform the redistricting process?
Yes.
And in general, what are different approaches that states have taken to reforms of the redistricting process?
So reforms usually follow one of two paths. There can be process reforms, where you try to take the redistricting power from one entity and give it to another. Generally, we're talking about taking it from the legislature and giving it to an independent commission. Oh, sorry. I talk about this often, so it kind of reels subconsciously. So there are process reforms where we're talking about taking the power generally from the legislature and giving it to someone like an independent commission, or changing where the process takes place. Then there are outcome tests, where you're implementing requirements for how the map has to look. So it's not a change in who's drawing the lines, it's more that the adopted map has to pass this test. And of course, some reforms combine those two approaches into one big piece.
Okay. All right. And are you familiar, Dr. Johnson, with the county grouping rules in North Carolina?
Yes.
And would you please describe the rules for the court?
So there's really two pieces to it. One is if a county can be a district all by itself, or if a couple of counties put together can be a district, or a couple of districts all by themselves, then you have to isolate them and draw that district that doesn't divide the counties. Then within a grouping, if you have a 3-county or 4-county grouping that makes up a county grouping, you also have to follow the traversals rule, which says if you can keep a county whole within that group, you have to do that. So it's both avoid splitting counties as much as possible and combine counties as much as possible. And then once you're in a group, you also have to keep counties within that group as whole as possible.
And Dr. Johnson, are you familiar with when those rules were adopted in the state of North Carolina?
Yes, they come out of the Stevenson litigation that followed the 2001 redistricting.
Now, Dr. Johnson, you did some analysis in this case to show how the county grouping rules that we've discussed affect a map maker's ability to use partisanship to draw districts, and I'd like to turn to that analysis now. To look at this question, I believe you created what you call a maximum Republican test map. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. I'd like for you now to turn to page 7 of your report, Legislative Defendants Exhibit 287. Dr. Johnson, when you looked for purposes of your analysis in this case, did you use a measure of partisanship or partisan balance in the districts?
Yes.
And what measure of partisanship did you use?
I call it the Republican advantage measure, just as a simple title. Actually, if we can scroll up a little bit on the screen to the quote above that. This is actually an effort. What I was looking for is what we always look for in redistricting, which is to find a set of data that give a good representation of how the voters feel. And in redistricting, we're usually looking for some test of pure partisan measure separate from incumbency and candidate-specific factors, because we're trying to draw districts not knowing who might run in many cases. And so in going through Dr. Cooper's report, he had looked at elections and as he puts it, found a group of elections that serve as a good proxy for voter intent. And that phrase is exactly what we want in a partisan measurement. And so the elections that he had listed were the council of state offices, so governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, state auditor, state treasurer, superintendent of public instruction, attorney general, commissioner of agriculture, commissioner of labor, and commissioner of insurance. And then as he notes, the lieutenant governor elections are relatively high profile. People generally know who those candidates are. And the others are much lower profile. And so they tend to be more indicative of people's just base Republican versus Democratic leanings. And these are exactly the kind of elections we look for when I was doing competitive studies for Arizona as well. And so I put together those 8 lower profile elections into an index and used those.
And you describe the elections that you use in, do you describe those in paragraph 22 of your report?
Yes. And the one thing I didn't mention that's mentioned in paragraph 22 is that when I got the state's 2016 database, it had the 2012 races for those offices. And so those were what I first tested. And then when I looked at how those measures worked for the 2018 elections, they achieved the goals I needed out of an index, which was a pretty good indicator of leanings in how the 2018 election would go.
All right. And one of the 8 elections that you identified, the Attorney General's election in 2012, was that one contested?
Oh, correct. Yeah, no, that race was uncontested, so we ended up with just 7.
Okay. All right. And what was the goal of the, you call it the Republican advantage measure? What was your goal in creating that measure?
To give me a ballpark figure on whether a district was safe for one party or the other or competitive. And I wasn't looking to be, ultimate precision. I wasn't looking to get it within 0.5%, or accurately predict everything. What I was looking for was a good estimate that then I could use to see, as I changed the districts, were they becoming more Republican or less Republican? And that measure worked out very well. When I compared it to the 2018 elections, it was pretty easy to break it up into the 3 groups I wanted, which was what's a safe seat for the Democrats, what's a safe seat for Republicans, and what range might be considered competitive seats that the measure didn't clearly indicate who was going to win that seat.
Okay. Now, Dr. Johnson, you've used the term safe and competitive, and I know we had a discussion about that earlier this morning. What definition of a competitive seat have you applied in this case?
So when I looked at a table where I applied those measures to 2018, it was very clear that essentially if the Democrats had a 10% advantage or more by this measure, they won. With one exception out of the 18 seats in that range, they won. If the Republicans had a 10% advantage or more, they won. And there were 20 seats in there. Democrats only won 1, so 95% accuracy is really good in this field. So that gave me a good confidence that those ranges were both good indications of what's safe. Then there were 12 seats in the middle. Republicans won 9, Democrats won 3, and the seats won by Republicans were actually on the Democratic side of the ledger. Most of the seats run by Democrats were on the Republican side. So that just gave me an indication that those 12 seats were competitive, that range was competitive.
Dr. Johnson, I'd like to turn now to demonstrative Johnson 1 in your notebook.
Okay.
All right. Now I'll represent to you that the figure here is figure 1 from your report, which is Legislative Defendants Exhibit 287, or excuse me, 72 rather. Can you orient the court and explain what this demonstrative depicts?
Sure. The map that it's showing is the 2017 adopted Senate map. The colors indicate the different Senate districts. The thin reddish-brown lines are the county lines, and the thicker green lines are the outlines of the county groupings dictated by the county groupings rule. So this is the 2017 map, and it just notes at the bottom that there are 18 safe Democratic seats where my Republican advantage measure is at -10% or lower. And as I just noted, Democrats won 17 of those 18 seats in 2018. There are 12 of the competitive seats that are between -10 and 10%, and then there are 20 safe Republican seats where the Republican advantage measure is plus 10% or higher.
We'll go ahead and break now for lunch recess and resume at 2:30.
Superior Court's in recess till 2:30.